Petrochemical plants emit a wide range of pollutants as a result of their daily operations that leak across the facility's fence line. Depending on wind speed and direction, these pollutants can create a kind of toxic soup that floods the surrounding community's ambient air. When we say toxic soup, we're referring to a concoction of different pollutants emitted by a petroleum facility that's detectable in the air at a given time. The toxic soup index is a value that's calculated based on the number of unique pollutants detected within a given period. To understand the composition of Benicia's toxic soup, we conducted a novel kind of analysis based on the first 6 months of data from the Benicia Community Air Monitoring Program, or BCAMP, one that focused on the co-occurrence of pollutants rather than the concentration of each pollutant. This was done by importing the most present data available into a table and then converting individual concentration values into a detect or non-detect based on the type of pollutant and their safety threshold. For chemical pollutants like benzene, toluene, and xylene, detections were counted for any concentration greater than 0, while for criteria air pollutants such as PM 2.5, ozone, and sulfur dioxide, they were only counted if their concentration was greater than the threshold for sensitive individuals on the air quality index scale. Once we had each pollutant designated as a yes or a no, we counted the number of yeses in each 5-minute monitoring window to get the toxic soup index. By looking at a specific period in time, or by aggregating the index over an hour, day, or month, you can see what the number or average number of pollutants detected within that time period was. In the first 6 months of monitoring, we found that the residents of Benicia have been exposed to an average of 4 different pollutants at any given time, and that for more than 44% of this time, the residents were being exposed to 5 or more pollutants at once. This histogram we created shows the frequency of each index value through a percentage to demonstrate how common different levels of pollution were. This was after we controlled for the detections of PM 2.5, 10, sulfur dioxide, and ozone that were below the AQI threshold for sensitive individuals. We also found that in January, February, and June, more than 50% of the time, there were 5 or more pollutants present at a detectable level in the ambient air, which indicates that there's potential for seasonal variation to be affecting the toxic soup. The severity of exposure to these pollutants varies, but prolonged exposure to these pollutants can result in numerous cardiorespiratory complications, including asthma, accelerated aging of the lungs, and even cancer. Our analysis illustrated 2 key findings. The first is that the community of Benicia is near constantly exposed to a toxic soup of pollutants. For only 16 hours in this 6-month survey, the TSI registered a 1, detecting PM1, which means that there was less than a day's worth of time where this community was only exposed to a single pollutant. The second is that there's evidence that this problem is far worse at other refineries. According to the Environmental Integrity Project, the Benicia refinery doesn't even crack the top 40 highest polluting refineries, with some of these facilities emitting benzene concentrations 10 times that of the Benicia refinery. This should indicate to the federal government that they need to adopt more stringent monitoring practices across the United States. These findings indicate 2 serious problems that the community of Benicia faces. First and foremost, fenceline communities deserve access to raw fenceline data. Because they live in such close proximity to a dangerous facility, Benicia residents deserve to know if an emissions event is great enough to force them to vacate the area. The second is that there isn't anywhere near enough information on the health effects of multi-pollutant exposure in humans. Most of the studies that we found only looked at the interactions between combinations of 2 different pollutants. While these studies have produced meaningful findings, the residents of Benicia are exposed to at least 4 pollutants on average at any given time. Until more research into the health effects of multi-pollutant exposure is conducted, environmental regulators should adopt more precautionary laws to protect the health and safety of fenceline communities across the United States.